Hey, it's Chris, Liege Games, and today we're going to be talking about Monster Pit, this latest game from Elzra in the Catacombs world, as recognized obviously clearly by the art that matches. And how is this one different? What do you need to know? Is it right for you? What does it do well? Where are some of the weaker points? What should you know on whether or not it should belong in your collection? So, let's get right into it. Let's do this. So if you're familiar with Catacombs, the third edition, especially, because this artwork matches that. This is set in the same universe, but although you are more familiar with Catacombs as more of a dexterity dungeon crawl-esque game, this one is a distinct departure, although it shares the aesthetic similarity. And what is it doing here? This is more of a resource management, dice rolling, tower defense-esque, but not really. Battle of attrition, a race to the finish, if you will. A race in the sense that you are trying to take out the big bad before they can make it all the way and destroy your city, or make it all the way around the track if you're using the board. What you're going to be doing is you're going to be buying heroes, sending them against the monster, shuffling him back, and dealing with his abilities, or her abilities, or its abilities, as you go along in this 1 to 4 player game. It's different and unique because although it feels most akin to a tower defense game, it is sort of a cooperative pandemic-esque resource management game rather than just buffeting attack after wave of enemies. And so it's doing something different from that aspect than other games that we have seen out there that are more in line with a classical tower defense. Point number 1, the biggest highlight for me when I did this game, when I played it through a couple times, was these boss monsters. Now, these boss monsters have, their own AI system, but again, this is heavily dice-based, and so you're going to have a number of rolls or number of successes, essentially, of how many successes of the monster you roll, and then the ability that corresponds to that. And they all do a very unique job in terms of differentiating the behemoth, the dragon, the vampire queen, the orc war chief, and the enchantress. Never once did I feel like I was fighting just a reskin of the enemy in terms of what it's doing and how it's affecting not only the board or the characters themselves or how I was dealing damage to the monster in the first place. And they all scale, as you can see down here at the bottom. It gets health times the number of players, and then it tells you what it also has separately just as a solo version as well. And it's all very, very intuitive. The AI system works very smoothly, and there's never a question of what or how it's going to work from that aspect. So that is a great boon to this game. It's awesome how this works. Point number 2, what you need to know is this board is absolutely freaking massive of the city. And it is difficult to keep track of if you are playing the full game mode because it adds about 3 or 4 different districts in terms of the capacity of the city in the first place and the different places that you're going to be going to shop, essentially. So again, the issue with that is not that there isn't enough, but there's almost too much plethora or variety in terms of trying to figure out what is going to be the most effective, because the first couple times I played this, that was the biggest challenge, right? You've got these districts which all have essentially 2 different things in them that you can be interacting with, and trying to figure out, especially at the lower player counts, what is going to be most effective against what boss monster. This reminds me less of a tower defense game in that sense and more of an Aeon's End, right? If you're familiar with Aeon's End as a deck builder, stay with me here for a second, because what you're doing against these monsters, because they all act so uniquely differently like the Aeon's End bosses, is the same strategy that's going to work for one is not going to work for the other, because they're all going to change how they defend themselves. They're all going to change in what order or how they move around the board to get closer to the end. And they're all going to change in terms of what's important to deal with currently versus what can wait. Which leads me sort of to point 3, is though, although it says 1 to 4 players, I would say this is going to be a better game. It's going to be more fluid. And I know some of this is going to be balanced out post-production. That right now it strikes me as a better game for 3 or 4 players at the higher player counts. I had a lot of difficulty at the 1 and 2 player counts. I won't lie. This game was very tough. Now, part of that was, prototype that I has the dice that do not have the right number of sides of each of them. And let me tell you right now, when I was talking to Aaron going back and forth, One of my concerns that he cut me off at before I could even mention it to him after playing it several times was that he's like, oh, hey, by the way, here are the dice. I had the sides wrong on the white ones and the yellow ones and the red ones. And so they're supposed to be this instead of this. And I said, because otherwise this game was massively difficult, especially playing two-handed at the 2-player count. I was just getting my floor wiped, like Last Bastion style difficulty in terms of how difficult it actually was. I was not even treading water after a couple rounds. And that ties into the previous point of the fact that, especially when you play this the first couple times, because of you having all of those districts, and do I want the low guys that I can get sooner, that I can spread throughout my attack and my defense, that I can just, block with or mitigate damage with so that he's moving less? Or do I just want to get the better ones out there that are going to give me slightly better dice? Because that was the challenge with these dice was, at best, the white dice was like 50-50. And to be frank with you, if you're looking at some of these pictures while I talk as B-roll footage in the background, you'll notice that a lot of my dice were not rolling the good stuff at all. And so to hear that the dice are going to be better from that aspect, it really makes me think this is going to be less of a Robinson Crusoe Friday Last Bastion, where your win percentage is like 10-20%. And this is going to be more like a 50%, because knowing that those dice proportions were off, it makes me go, oh, okay, this game all of a sudden became much more enjoyable, because I think it would be not easier, but I would be able to do damage to these monsters. And that was the big problem. It was not holding my own, but it was just gradually slipping away, that I was holding my own, but not getting any progress. And so hearing that really encouraged me from a design perspective. Again, obviously, this is all prototype too, so, I expect it to be better later on anyway, and that's good that it's just going to be better than this already. Going back for the next point, I feel like some of the districts, I almost feel like there could be one less, because some of the items and some of the mounts felt very overlapping, and there wasn't as much distinction, and so to cut down on that from just like by one deck maybe, would be really just, again, streamlining it, because I think it would just give it that much of more is not always better. Again, there are like 3 different places you can get workers, and there are like, you can get mounts, and you can get wizards, and you can get items, and it's nice in the fact that when you see a lot of these decks, that the top card is flipped up, so you know what you're getting, which is a way to mitigate it a little bit. And I like that aspect. It does it really well in terms of, if you're gonna buy a card from a deck, having the top one up is nice. It's also nice because although there's not like a traditional market that you're going to be buying from, those top cards at the end of every round get flipped down to the bottom. So one, you're recycling through things, and if there's not something you like this turn, you can go next turn and maybe get something else that's better that you're seeing. And or if you miss something, these decks are also not massive enough, especially from the market where you're buying the main amount of heroes, that you're not going to be able to see those again before the end of the game, which, okay, if you miss it, it's not just gone forever into the abyss of the deck. The other last interesting aspect here, and then again, this goes back to the dice. The dice are by far and away the main mechanic, the key feature to everything that you are using. Attack, defense, your attack, the monster's attack. You're rolling heavy. Other very interesting aspect to that is that you are going to be rolling, and you are going to be rolling a maximum of a certain number of dice. I think it's 8 most of the time. You can only roll a maximum number of whites, yellows, and reds. But even the reds, you are going to be having risk reward with some of those characters, where better characters are going to give you better dice, but sometimes better characters are going to make you roll worse dice in order to counteract their powers. And the bosses are going to be leveling up their dice in the opposite way. They're going to be trying to get more yellow and red dice, even if they start with white dice. Enemies are also going to be taking like prisoners or shields that you're going to be having to mitigate, and they're going to have to be taking out before you can even do damage. And then there's also the whole additional side quests. There's the whole additional extra monsters coming in. And so again, it's an interesting perspective because it gives you a whole spectrum of difficulty. And I think knowing the dice are going to be better sided than the ones I have right now, it makes me more encouraged to keep some of those, like the quests and the extra enemies and the encounters in, because otherwise, if they weren't, I would probably suggest that they would be just you know, kind of maybe a few of them just taken out, because add them as an expansion, add them as a module, which they are for the most part. You can do a basic or a full complete mode, and it definitely affects the length of the game if you're using some of those extra, you know, stables, items, quests, versus if you're not. Which again, this game is not like rules overhead wise, you know, nuanced, keeping track of all the little minutia. Which I say that actually as a very positive. This was a very easy game to get to the table. So what are my final thoughts on this? That last point is very, very important. I'm going to drill that one home right now. If you can't get a game to the table, it doesn't matter how good or not it is. And if you listen to any of my other videos on this channel, that is one thing I harp about a lot. And so the fact that you're giving me a little bit of wiggle room in terms of sliding scale on how long I want the game to be or how depth-wise I want the game to be, it does a very good job of that. Knowing the dice are going to be different than the ones I have makes me much more encouraged in a final product in terms of not trying to do too much at once. I still think I would probably get rid of maybe like one of those decks where, you know, I just thought there was a little bit too much overlap with them. But it's not something enough to make me go, it's a huge flaw in the game. It's more just, I don't find myself using that one compared to some of the other ones. But again, maybe that's just me not having played it enough either, where some of those are definitely going to be better in certain scenarios than others. Because everything is going to cost you different amounts, and sometimes you're not going to have the change to go after one, or you can go one place and buy it for a later turn. It helps upgrade your captain or your defense and how you want to deal with things. The fact that the captains all have asymmetric powers, again, really screams to me that that's a great aspect, but it makes me think that I would like playing this game. Having played it 1 and 2 player, I would like it more from a 3 and a 4 player standpoint overall. And again, I say that as a positive, not a negative. I say that as, I think I would be more enthralled and entertained by more interaction on the table because of the way the interaction with the districts and the monster works and the teamwork that is going to be more apparent at those higher player counts, that sometimes, even when I look at like Pandemic Iberia on my back shelf, it's just not as full of an experience at the lower player counts, even though it's still the same game and it's still a great game and I recognize it at that. I just get a fuller experience there versus the lower ones, because it gives me more options, more variety at the lower player counts. In these games in general speak, you have to follow a certain min-max in order to do it, and this game definitely does that, which is why I would ultimately recommend it at the higher player counts instead of the lower player counts. But again, the other question that needs to be asked and needs to be answered is, why get this? Because it's doing stuff from a resource management cooperative style game, especially from the boss side of things. Because you can say what you want about the decks and the markets and the heroes, but the bosses, especially just like with Marvel United, I mean, like the heroes sometimes are interchangeable and the locations are slightly different, but what really makes that game is the vast asymmetry of the bosses themselves, because then it creates a whole different dynamic of how you're utilizing the board and the game mechanics as a whole. And this does the exact same thing with how different these bosses are and the ingeniousness behind the interactions of how the bosses, the districts, the heroes, the fights, and everything in between. So that is by far the best aspect of this game, and that's what makes it fun to play. And again, the dichotomy between this and Catacombs, where I mentioned at the beginning, set in the same universe, the problem with Catacombs, as much as I love me some Catacombs, it's like a 2 to 3 hour game depending on how quick and how long you play, right? Especially if it's new people, even though it's a dexterity game. This, you know, cuts that in half easily. And so it works very well from that aspect too, because again, like I said, if you can't get it played, if it's too long, if it's too complicated, it's not going to hit the table. It's going to collect dust. And that's not why you're looking at this or thinking of buying this in the first place. And so from that account, it succeeds as well. There you go. That is Monster Pit. and my thoughts on it. Let me know if you have any questions, comments, or concerns. Hit the like button. Help me help you in the future. Thanks, as always, for watching. Stay classy. Have a great day. I love talking about games. I love it. I love it. Thanks, Aaron, for sending me this, for the ability to play it out and talk about it in the first place.